There's no tried and true method of ensuring that the succession of a family business down to the next generation is going to have a positive outcome. But there certainly are things, depending on the size of that business, that you might want to make sure of. Like, for example, if you're running a business and it gets to a size where it has a life of its own, don't automatically assume that the next generation in your family are the only ones who can run that business, and better yet, are the right ones to run that business. If you make decisions for your business that are in the best interest of the business, then you're going to end up making the right decisions. Now, there often are times where having a family member involved in a business in some instances is the right thing for the business because of the optics and/or the perception of clients of that business. But you've got to make sure that whoever it is that's succeeding you in business is prepared. A lot of family-run businesses that are started by two brothers or three brothers or two cousins or a husband and wife, you take for granted that we're family, and so therefore you don't put in place a proper shareholders agreement, or you don't put in place proper succession planning because you take it for granted that we're family. And then as that business progresses, where family member A thinks the business ought to go is different than where family member B thinks the business ought to go, or family member A has kids and/or grandkids and they believe that they're the logical successor, and family B has kids or grandkids and they think they're the logical successor. In most situations where I've seen these things go the wrong way, there hasn't been a good enough shareholders agreement in place to guide how do you exit the business, how do we govern succession. Good shareholders agreements actually deal with that. And then the other thing that I've seen, even where there are good shareholders agreement, force of wills tends to take the overriding factor in terms of creating and/or resolving the types of issues that come up in those circumstances. It's family running a business as opposed to the business being the underpinning of the family, because oftentimes it's the latter that happens, where the business ruins the family as opposed to the family recognizing we're running a business and it's not us. The best way to ensure the success of a business beyond the founders is to put in place a good solid board structure, because a board has a mandate that's different than the role of a founder. Okay, the mandate of a board is the success of the business, is the underlying best outcome for the business. The ultimate objective of a founder may be very different than that. And so an organization that is thinking about succession, I would tell you to not consider a board structure. You're leaving out something that's critical to ensuring the likelihood that succession is going to work. I would think something that's very important to consider when setting up and activating the board of a family business is use general board principles and board frameworks in running that board. Don't run the board as sort of a to-do as opposed to for the purpose of a board. So take the time to understand the purpose and the role of boards, and take the time to create a framework that's not inconsistent with running any good business and applying it and adapting it to your family circumstance. Because if you do that, you've got a much better likelihood of success. Sometimes the family issues bleed into the business decisions, and then they bleed into the family issues, and it's a self-fulfilling cycle. That's when, and depending on the size of that business, that's when a business needs to think about having an outside board member. And that outside board member is not a family member, and therefore can bring a set of fresh eyes to the conversation that as a family member deeply ensconced in the issues, you're unable to deal with them. We try to take a very objective approach to identifying the necessary skills for the jobs and/or roles in question, for understanding how an organization makes the transition from, in some cases, a deeply entrenched senior management as quote-unquote founders to the next sort of succession of management. And we bring them sort of best practices, and we bring them standard role definitions and job descriptions. But then we spend an awful lot of time with them talking about, the nuances of a family environment in the context of these best practices and well-defined role definitions. And we have found that, once you get the trust of the people you're trying to advise, it becomes a much easier discussion. So when I go into a family business, because of the fact that you often have jack of all trades in founders and or family members, there's a few things that I say to a family member. I say, when you're playing the role of a family member, understand it distinct from your role as a board member, your role as a shareholder, and or your role as management. And so when you're in the role of management and you're dealing with management decisions, try your best to recognize that there are three distinct roles. We recognize you can never sort of separate them all the time, and or even at any time can you fully separate from them. But we really spend time with family members in these situations to show them the difference between the role of a family member, the role of a board member, the role of a shareholder, and the role of management. And it's interesting that once you get them to fully understand those different roles, then you can have a conversation with them. And in that conversation, be conscious. Who am I speaking to right now? Am I speaking to you, the shareholder, or am I speaking to you, the director? So when you're dealing with difficult issues, you try to remind them, we're having a discussion with you as the director right now. Once you've got the trust of the individuals involved in the situation, and you've gotten them to see that you can give them examples of what's worked in the past, what's not worked in the past, what's failed in the past, and why, from real life examples, it puts you in a really good position to work with them to make the decisions that are going to get them to the right place in the long run.